Good evening and welcome to Steel City Strings podcast for this online virtual concert. My name's Jeremy Boulton and I'm joined here with composer John Spence, who is in residence at the Wollongong Conservatorium of Music. G'day, John.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. And tonight we're going to talk about your piece specifically. Now, your piece is called Dark Fire. It's a string quartet for the players of the Steel City Strings. So you obviously had players in mind for this. And it's called Dark Fire in honor of those who saved lives and lost their own. And obviously in reference to our recent bushfire tragedy in New South Wales. You have three movements in this work: fire clouds, out of control, and scorched earth. And they all have different moods and different themes. And your dedication is to the memory of those that perished in the Australian bushfires of the summer we've just experienced, a horrendous summer. Now, John, you're a keen writer for strings. I know this, and so just tell us briefly. I mean, why do strings appeal to you as a composer, and in particular chamber strings? I know that's a favorite of yours.
Yeah, part of that is association with the people you know and the people around you, and so that sort of drives a lot of your activity. But it's there's something to conquer, really. You keep learning. The more you write for strings, the more you learn about them, and the more you think you don't know anything about writing for them. So yeah, they're a wonderful beast, and it's not to say that the same can be said for all instruments, really. The more you explore them, the more you learn about them, and the more you realise there's just so much depth to them. So it is good to focus, but of course it's good not to get too bogged down.
Yes, absolutely. I know you like to play with extended techniques quite a lot. I was just about to say, and I know you're responsible for disrupting many a string player in their in their conservative bowing and all this sort of thing. You like to play around with the instruments. I know.
Yeah, yes and no. I think there is a time to push. A lot of the times, I don't think that a lot of my ideas are particularly edgy. I'm not going to ask a violin player to slap their violin against a wall, but things just grow larger, and you want to use wider intervals and wider leaps, and a lot of your voicings are not standard, and then you just realize when people are just trying to put your music into their fingers that it's a bit more angular than you might have accounted for in the first place. So you really have to keep a good grip on reality, because it's what you want to get out of a musician. I mean, there is a time to stress a musician out gently, in order to evoke their passion and their intensity. They need to be doing intense actions, and that's no problem at all. we can do that, but other times don't overly complicate it, and you've got to pull back. A lot of the difficulty with my music is ensemble rhythm can be nasty, and I do like to play some complex games rhythmically, and I have tried to sort of pull back a little bit on this, because sometimes there's a place for just for just singing and playing a theme, and just seeing the other side of music, and sort of keeping your perspective. And this was the right work to sort of do that and pull back a bit and just concentrate on other types of musicality.
Yes, I mean absolutely, and I can see what you've done in your third movement. Particularly, we get into for the music buffs. I mean, we from what I look at first, I see a sort of quasi sort of Passacaglia. It's in three. It's sort of lugubrious, and it's very much stretched out and in the voicing of the instrument, and sort of it's very more much of a lyrical thing. Whereas in your second movement, it's definitely more rigid, jagged, all those sort of things. So I definitely think there's just from looking at the score, it's a very varied work. How do you get the balance between writing for? Do you look holistically at a work and go, "Oh, this section needs to be jagged, and I need to use big leaps here"? Is it does it come out of your flow of ideas, or are you using the pitching and the voicings as an effect?
Uh, it depends on the work a bit, but to take this as an example, so I try to get sort of a canvas full of harmonies and chords and as a way of controlling levels of tension and ease of tension, to sort of lay out a perspective. I'll get a sound in my head, and I sort of think, what do I want to express? And so I'll hopefully I'm not standing at a bus stop when I'm doing this, but I'm probably going to go in my head, and I'm hearing something, and then that's sort of a bit vague, and you sort of got to start to sort of flesh some of those ideas in your mind out, and so you sort of start from a very vague dot over there in the corner and try to get closer and closer and closer to it, and you're sort of continually fleshing it out.
So let's start. Let's talk movement by movement and see what our audience can expect to hear in this online performance. You start off with an opening viola solo, which is not every composer's choice. So definitely something unique there. Doloroso, you've got marked, and you've got marked in particular piangendo, which is, well, clarify for the audience what you mean by all this terminology. What do you want to come out of this?
It needs to start off very sad and crying. It needs to be a very sad, weeping theme, which the violin is so good at, viola in this case. Just that sort of emotion. Sometimes those little sort of portamento flex and slides that can just capture so much emotion. So the opening is the real tune is announced by the second violin, which is the second thing that happens. So the viola sort of commences, and it's that mellow sound. Who doesn't want to hear that? Start with the viola, and it's just in a sort of a lower mid-range, playing sadly, is just going to capture the right emotion. And so then the violin then of course plays it round the right way. The viola is playing backwards, actually. It's playing the theme backwards, and that sort of makes it sound a bit darker. And then the violin sort of flips it round the right way. We hear the proper version. And so then, however, the viola is sort of underneath it. So as if I can reach over and play a line. So the viola sort of finishes its line. And then the viola sort of sits on that note, so it's got a bit of a drone without any vibrato, so it's going to sound quite icy. And then, of course, the violin 2 starts with the real melody. So perhaps it was going to be more positive. It can't all be that bad, and we sometimes we need convincing in the face of tragedy and the way we deal with tragedy. There's this constant looking for hope, and so what happens in this opening movement is that each canonic entry is upper tone. So it's getting brighter and brighter, and so through this canon it's sort of getting happy and then positive, and then bang, we're in it.
This second movement, this is chaotic, and you've called it your second movement out of control. I mean, is the first movement? Are we saying that a fire has started and that we're moving into a crazy time, or are we moving? Are we
Yeah, it's
talking
that
about another?
awareness, the confronting of the situation, and there's great hope and great reserve not to despair in people. People have great strength and rise to the occasion, and that's what we saw. We saw, what struck me particularly is people volunteers rushing out to the ground zero, leaving their own homes, walking away from their own homes, children and family, knowing they're probably losing their own home. The sense of community commitment, I think, is a challenge to all of us. I think we've really got to think about the commitment these people have made, and we've witnessed it, and they've really put themselves on the line, and unfortunately some have lost their lives, and so the great in the face of we saw a fire so great that we had fire clouds, literally. We are talking 70-metre flames. Now, the Opera House is 65 metres tall, so I'm told. Just imagine fire flames that high. So great tragedy, and people just so brave, just absolute heroes, just going out there and being able to really put themselves on the line in their own families, and so that's what that's all about. But then the second movement just is this sort of chaotic, trying to deal with everything. So just complex chords that are very unresolved. So harmonies, just very edgy, and the way I've put them together is not the way some of these harmonies might be normally used.
And you decide to close this movement with some very strong chords all together in this big declamation right at the end.
Yeah, and it's a complete reinforcing of we're all together in this, but we're sort of fighting, and there was a lot of tension even in the public discourse. Sort of at a national level, we sort of had a lot of questions to ask ourselves. We'll learn lessons, great lessons out of all of that. But that's what I sort of see, the sort of scramble of opinion and thought, and how do we deal with this, and that's what that's all about.
Yes, and I mean you close this second movement strongly, and then we have absolute silence, of course, for the next movement, and we move back into a similar mood as the beginning of the piece, I would say. Usually, particularly in early music, is fast, slow, fast in the structure. But now we're doing a 3-movement work, but it's the other way around. I mean, we have 2 sections opening and closing the piece that are quite somber, and in the middle we have this chaos. Now, the third movement is called Scorched Earth, but I see there's unison between the 2 parts, the 2 violins, then the viola, and then we have a little cello melody quite up high. So there's some real beautiful characteristics happening here. Why do you choose to have unison between the parts? Is that a theme of unity, or are you trying to create a bit of destabilization here between the sounds of the different instruments? What's the goal here?
It's that sort of numbness, really, still nothingness, and they'll be doing it without vibrato as well. At least I have 3 of them doing it. Violins don't like 2 violins doing the same thing, but it is an edgy sound, and so Scorched Earth is a war term. That's just going all out, and this was a war. So this is really saying this was a war. I sort of appealed to my roots to look for. To try to capture and express the sense of loss. I sort of look back to my Irish folk song roots. the Irish do a great tune. so,
They sure do.
so I thought, look, the best I can do, without trying to create some corny, nice tune. I don't write normal chords very well, Jeremy.
I know.
they wander away very quickly. So, but this can ground me. This can sort of hold me down if I sort of appeal to a sort of an Irish folk tune sound. So that's what I've done, and so the cello sort of comes out with this. Which is in C major, but then that C becomes C minor. So that'll be a lovely moment to hear the cello just playing a simple little tune and to sort of express that solidarity with people's loss and
yes,
sense of
and because we
tragedy.
have all of the strings come back to that C after that solo, and then we recontextualize into C minor, and then you start to subdivide a little bit more in the themes. There's an entry of the viola at pianissimo. Is that trying to destabilize the C? There's the C, which is the center tone that we're going to have throughout this movement.
So it's this growth thing that we experienced in the first movement, but it's the expansion of that idea. It's from and then trying to hold back, but getting out of control, and so slowly developing, and so that sort of grows into. It keeps coming back because once the folk tune has finished, then we're and then it's growing. Okay, so it's just it's not letting go of that little theme that's been there throughout the whole piece, and then what it actually does is it returns. It's the rest of the work. The rest of that movement is basically variations on that original tune that the violin 2 played in the opening. So it really takes that whole tune and the motifs within that tune and actually deals with it.
Now, tell us about the end. We have been centered around the note of C, and the note below C is a B, obviously, but we close the piece with a B after a big cello solo. Why do you choose to close on a B after we've been in a C the whole movement?
Because it's completely unresolved. I've left it hanging. It's just completely left hanging. The chords that violin 1, 2 and the viola play, they're just playing in harmonics at the end there. Once the piece comes to an end, then the cello reminds us of that little folk tune that we heard. So it's just quoting that folk tune again. We're just hearing a little tail end of that reflection that's just left alone, which is what happens. Because when people suffer loss, they try to go back to their normal lives, and it's not until years later, in a lot of cases, that the loneliness can settle in. And it's, so I've left it hanging.
But I do imagine that a lot of people affected by bushfire do feel this way. I mean, I did hear a story about a woman who, in her small township, was the only one who kept her house. And even she was affected because she felt extremely guilty that was the case. She thinks she would have felt better if she had lost her house, and that's a very sad thing. I think your work's really captured it, John. I think that's a really great analysis of your entire work, and I wish you the best of luck for your premiere online.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity of the players from Steel City Strings taking the initiative to do this. It's fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you, John.
Thank you.